Today in News Tech, the most popular CMS for news publishers. Contradictions in the Austin American-Statesman paywall strategy. A holistic strategy for content, distribution, audience growth, and engagement. Google ad revenue surges 33% in the last quarter of 2021. And CherryRoad Media is investing in newspapers, not mining them for assets. So according to the Press Gazette, WordPress is still the number one CMS for news publishers across the whole world. I think they looked at 2,000 world's leading news websites, the top websites in terms of traffic. I believe the number was 40% were built on WordPress.
Content management systems. What do top news websites use? This episode of Today in News Tech is made possible with audio articles by ourhometown.com. Today we're highlighting a piece by Aisha Majid over at Press Gazette, reporting on a collaboration with Built with analyzing the technology behind 2,000 of the world's leading news websites. The article, which CMS do publishers use? Tech stack of world's top news websites analyzed, notes that more than 4 in 10 sites use WordPress for at least part of their domain. You want the best tools for your business, but secondly, stakeholders, the editorial team, the commercial teams, the management, all need to be confident in the solution that you're proposing. And more, it's the modularity and ability to change, not necessarily very quickly, but efficiently, says Sanjay Ravindran, New Statesman Media Group's Chief Information Officer. Here are the big takeaways. WordPress has proved extremely popular as an open source and highly customizable platform, allowing news outlets to adapt the technology to the specific needs of their newsrooms. The key purpose of a CMS is to ensure that the editorial team can do their job and do it efficiently, as well as satisfying revenue requirements. Usage of headless CMS, which separates a website's content from how it is presented, has become increasingly popular, as it ensures a consistent reader experience across platforms and devices. Our Hometown provides a feature-rich, customized WordPress platform for news publishers, a turnkey solution for news content, advertising, and subscription management.
So this is a stat that we're familiar with. This is one of the reasons that we chose WordPress, right? Because it's not just the CMS and the technology, it's how it's used. And as I always tell publishers, if you've ever had a WordPress blog, you can manage this newspaper website because it has all the same core features. The layout of the dashboard is the same, but what we've done is added all the plugins that you need to run a newspaper website. So I just thought it was interesting that it's the most popular CMS in the world is the bottom line.
Drupal comes in at 15% behind a 40% market share. Yeah, here in
Was that it? Yeah, Drupal. Okay, so just for a little bit of history there, we were on Drupal for years. The beginning of the company was all about Drupal. The thing about Drupal is it's so customizable, but you really need to be an engineer to change almost anything about it. It's not user-friendly in terms of changing design. And again, a lot of things are possible with it, but you could do those same things on WordPress, but the user experience at the end of the day is by far the best on WordPress. So,
the customized hybrid systems take up 25. So that could be combinations.
Wow. Right.
How our hometown might fit into kind of a publisher's own system with the extensive amount of customization you guys have done.
I read about that. They said a couple things like you may go to a website and it may actually be on the front end. It looks like you're on one website, but there's multiple CMSs actually there, with different subdomains. A good example of that is the audio articles player. So this we can host as a subdomain on any website through an RSS feed, the content from their live website, which can be on any CMS. We bring it into here and then we host it as a subdomain. And now all of a sudden that publisher is actually a WordPress publisher because that's part of their tech stack now. It's one of the CMSs driving their site.
And they're taking advantage of us hosting on AWS and everything on this subdomain.
It's kind of a little bit siloed and segmented from whatever servers they're using for their primary CMS. So the big tech companies like Wall Street Journal, New York Times, they've pieced together their own solution. And one component of that could easily be WordPress because it's so easy to get up and going with prototypes. I would imagine that's how a lot of big organizations test concepts. They just launch a WordPress blog and run the feature on there, and then either keep it there or integrate it into the primary CMS.
We had a little chat last night between Jack and myself, and we were talking about the old Drupal days compared to WordPress.
Right.
And one of the biggest benefits that I think we offer our customers is that our team has done all the searching, and we continue to search for things that are, all the plugins that are suited or customized to newspapers alone. I mean, if you can have a WordPress site on your own, thinking you're saving money, and
Right.
maybe you can, but is it going to work with your newspaper? And, why spend hours trying plugins and
Right.
deleting them and going through pulling your hair out to do all that when we've already done it? We've got the plugins that are fit for newspapers.
That's right. They've been road tested by hundreds of
Right.
publishers.
Exactly.
And it's really cool situation that we have. We're almost like part association, part consultant, but we're also delivering this service. So we do all those things. We're doing the research, testing the plugins, updating them. These are things that are not trivial. If you know WordPress, you could probably update a plugin, but if you break something, it could be any one of the other plugins on the site. You have no idea where to even start. So error handling and troubleshooting, that's kind of like a whole other side of engineering beyond just setting up a website and getting it to work in the first place. We have full-time engineers that are entirely focused on when is the latest update for MemberPress or Gravity Forms. Let's get that in and make sure all the plugins are on the latest version so that they are integrated and working at 100%. The developers can release updates, and if you install one of those without understanding how it interacts with the other plugins, you can easily break things, and it's tough to know where to start. Okay, let's get to looking at some of the contradictions, quote unquote, in Austin American's two-tiered content strategy. Can you tell us a little bit about this story, Chris? This sounded interesting. Basically, as I understand it, they're moving away from the metered paywall, which is the industry standard, towards free content and then paywalled content.
This came through a letter to readers from the publisher, the editor, Manny Garcia. And he says, starting this week, readers who aren't yet subscribers will no longer be limited on the number of articles they can read in a 30-day period. That's the meter. Now, more than ever before, more people in Austin and Texas will be able to have access to key news and information without limitations, hundreds of stories each month. So I went back to the actual letter to get a bit more context on what Garcia was trying to get at here, because he follows that statement with saying, however, subscribers will continue to be rewarded with our best work, award-winning storytelling, analysis, commentary, and investigations you can't find anywhere else.
Right.
So he's defining now what the premium content for subscribing actually is, because they have been sending out most of their coverages like homeless issues, affordability, growth and development, food and dining, local sports, local politics. These are the kind of community stories that they want to keep or now make free.
Right.
And then just encourage those who want more of their quote unquote long form / investigative content to then be behind that subscription.
This is such a great story. We're always open to changing our opinion. We're not going to be locked into any model. We're not going to be difficult like that and just immovable. Things are changing all the time. Now, I will definitely say that I recommend to publishers the metered paywall for a number of reasons. You look at the top news organizations, New York Times and Wall Street Journal, they're all doing it. To me, it makes sense as a user, I think, to be able to capture casual traffic, but not just have it totally open and unlimited. But this is a really compelling argument for the old model, I guess you could say. It's not a hard paywall, but it's a hard paywall on certain categories and then totally open on other categories. Let's talk about the benefits of something like this. This really could make strategic sense. Tyler, I want to ask you about it because you had a great article a couple of weeks ago about just getting revenue from every article however you can. And there's two approaches to that. You can either monetize with ads by giving it away for free, or you can have the paywall on it, right?
Right.
I thought that was really insightful. And this is essentially, I don't know if that's what their thinking is behind this change, but it reminds me of that very much. The general purpose content, the stuff that seemingly will be most popular in terms of numbers. It seems like that's what they're putting in front of the paywall. And then the stuff that actually costs the most to produce, and it is kind of the most niche.
I would almost just describe it as having a revenue strategy rather than just trying to have a revenue model. Your whole model shouldn't be subscriptions.
Right.
You should have a strategy
right.
over what you can. It's just like a while back, we were talking about those dynamic subscriptions.
Yes.
That would
automatically set it open, right?
Yep. Automatically set it open if enough people were searching for it, because you know it's going to get the traffic.
Right.
Where the ad revenue is going to compensate or surpass what you get from a subscription.
Yeah, that was the context it came up in, which is a really fascinating idea and technology that we should definitely look into. But this is the same principle. It's the idea of creating a revenue strategy that's not all in on any one channel. It's not all reader revenue and it's not all advertising. It's a mix, but the publisher's making the decision on what's free. That other example would be the algorithm, or there'd be some threshold of page views that would do it.
But the publisher can
override that,
get the same data that the algorithm was getting.
That would be a good way to make the decisions on which categories to make free. Kind of counterintuitive from the approach that I have just really embraced, and I think that the industry has embraced, but maybe this works better in some markets. If you really do have the resources to do these in-depth, long-form investigative journalism, it could just be that they're looking at it like this, like we need to cover those additional costs. So that's behind the paywall. And then everything else is less expensive to produce. So let's monetize it with advertising.
Right. I mean, that kind of reminds me of what the Boston Globe was doing, where they had that higher price subscription model, but they flat out at the front said, look, this is to fund our research. This is investigative pieces that this money is going towards, which might be a good way to frame it for your readers.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to really put your strategy behind that statement, I just think it really lends credibility to it. You know, people understand an investigative piece is different than a police report, which is just pure data and there's not really research involved. And it's just a quick thing. And the investigative stuff is really what journalism is about. That's really what you can't get anywhere else except at the local paper.
I was just going to say, I absolutely agree with what you just said there, you know, as far as the cost to go through the investigative process. But there's a quote right there, the second paragraph from the bottom, that I think kind of sums everything up.
This one? Just
Quality
this one.
Journalism brings value. And, you know, again, we can't forget the image that we project by charging for content and not charging for it, because people tend to think of free as less valuable than something that they're going to pay for. So
definitely touching on the devil's advocate point of view of this article here in the last paragraph.
It's almost like where the headline came from. I didn't see a whole lot of contradictions in this until this last statement, which is, are you devaluing the free content? It's an interesting argument. Maybe there is some of that going on subconsciously, but it's all just relative to the premium content. So maybe it's almost like that elevates the premium content by having something for free on the site. Does that make sense?
Right. And I think even having free content projects an image of community spirit and that sort of thing, which
the
is something
essential
that newspapers definitely need to do. And people want feel good stuff. So if you're putting recipes or puzzles or entertainment type things as free content, I don't think that comes across as something cheap. What does devalue your image, I think, is putting that investigative journalism free. That devalues your content overall.
There's a definite psychology you got to think about there. And unfortunately, the newspaper industry just wanted to give everything away for free at first, hoping that the advertising would catch up. But the unintended consequences devalued the content, and it's kind of created the situation where everyone's chasing page views. So we're trying to come back from that and get back on a track where it's more about quality content. You really have a good relationship and you're listening to your audience, and obviously they stay tuned in for you. And which actually brings up a good point for our next article, unless there's any other comments on this one.
I just have one final quote to follow up with what Terry had to say. Is Garcia says, our approach here is twofold. We want to support the community by providing unlimited access to need-to-know information in both times of crisis and calm. We hope that by bringing you more access to our journalism, you will see the value of our work and join our growing family of subscribers.
I couldn't agree with that more. There is overlap in the strategy with the metered paywall, because with this, they're hoping to maintain traffic on the free columns. It's interesting because we also get a lot of questions from publishers. For example, a lot of our papers are in like North Dakota. They can get some pretty crazy snowstorms up there, totally knock out mail delivery. They need to be able to quickly give free access to certain categories or even the whole e-edition. So I think every publisher feels this obligation to deliver some free news. I don't know if that's pressure just from their readers, or they just feel like that's part of the role, that they need to give certain information to everyone, but others not. It's interesting because with the metered paywall, Terry, this is a technical question. I don't believe that we can have it so that, or correct me if I'm wrong, if there's a meter on the site, can we have certain categories that even the meter won't be able to access?
I don't see why it wouldn't work. In fact,
Gotcha.
I would almost recommend it.
The only thing would be just have to be very clear about what is free, because
Like election season, you could have a
Right.
special election candidate category that's just free no matter what.
There's-
Pulling it just behind the paywall, would that be the same thing?
I think we could definitely make it for free, because when you mark an article for free access, it just wipes out the paywall rules. But what
Yeah.
I'm wondering is there a way to lock down only for subscribers certain articles and then have the meter work on all the other stories?
Yeah, I also have had recent questions that were asking about that exact scenario you just mentioned.
Really?
So
Two more stories left. Okay. Let's do this one, Chris, because I did get a chance to read this. And I mentioned this in a Twitter space that I did earlier today. I was testing out that new feature on Twitter just to see what that was like. One thing that stood out to me about this article that I liked, it's just really a small part of it, but they point out this architecture of participation and how that's evolved. And I thought this was a really interesting analogy. I think it was Mark Twain specifically that said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And looking at this example, remember the movie Newsies, right? In the early 1900s, 1800s, they were people, they sat on the corner of busy intersections and sold newspapers. It was totally like a flyby situation. There was no relationship built with the subscribers. But then what happened? The Great Depression resulted in a loss in advertiser revenue. So they had to change the model and they shifted more towards subscriptions. So look at that. Is that history rhyming right now or what? I mean, we've got this depression in advertising revenue that's been going on for years because of the duopoly taking all that business away from newspapers, but then it was accelerated by COVID, and we see this increased interest in digital subscriptions. So to me, I see the exact same thing happening now. For a good part of the last 20 years, publishers really held on to the hope that digital advertising would follow them online, and they would just be able to give everything away for free, and the advertising would make up for that. But that's just not the case. Again, that market has been taken by Google and Facebook. So if we can shift more towards a membership model, whether that's free or paid, it's about building the relationship with the customer. That's just one thing I wanted to point out. I'm not even sure how key that is to this whole article. I just thought it was an interesting analogy. So
I did enjoy that part. And technically speaking of things that I thought were relevant to our publishers, I did skip down a little bit towards the right before they start mentioning the holistic strategy.
Right. Okay. Right around here.
And there's a couple of quotes here where, because they gave a little history lesson, they don't show up until 2015. And this is an education website. It's focused on education in North Carolina. So it's a statewide site trying to basically do news coverage, features, all research, all of these things from scratch. And this article is written by the editor-in-chief. So she's basically just telling her story. She says she had to learn the hard way that content distribution for search engines, social media, newsletters is different from audience growth, users and page views, which is different from engagement, being in two-way communication with the audience. So they had gone through various strategies, but when the pandemic hit, because they're an educationally focused news outlet, they were actually doing school visits and things with vaccine education and outreach and things like that, which then turned into quite a huge growth in their reach.
Right.
And as she mentions a little further down, I think it's below that that video there, she says in May 2020, they had a bit of a identity crisis. So they hired a strategy. They weren't sure what the focus was going to be with all this new growth. So they hired a strategist. And if you scroll down just a little bit more, I think you'll find these bullet points of the things that they wanted to examine about their process, the way their website was actually working. These are fairly familiar to us. And so I thought we could take a look a little bit of these, and then as it goes down, kind of talk a little bit about how some of these tools have been something that we found useful in helping our customers grow. I thought the need for a director of communications was interesting because I think our hometown kind of steps in to that role. For our customers. And then there are a couple of nice takeaways about how their growth has been. Even amount of traffic growth between their channels, search engine, newsletters, and things. They've had some definite growth coming down. If you go a little further down, a year in is the final section. And there's some rolling average things in there. This is actually increased. And what you actually, just one more thing before I kind of turn it back to a general discussion, if you scroll right back up a little bit, is their algorithm that they designed. So if you keep scrolling back up, it's a PDF page of need, do, must do, and all that. That page. And it has some ridiculously specific technical things that they want to accomplish as a website and how to do it, from SEO to newsletter development to ad campaigns.
Nice.
All the type of things and this is a free resource directly from their site. They say free access just to help people in the same place as them. And so I thought this was some really amazing, detailed insight into how they actually made this success story a reality.
Wow. Yeah, this is something definitely practical to take away from this. I guess I just have a quick question. Can you define in your own words, what do they mean by architecture of participation?
It seemed to shift from talking about the relationship between the paperboy and the customer, and then getting to the newspapers and now this digital thing. And it seemed to, once they started revamping, the participation seemed to be much more about an internal staff structure that they wanted to focus on and find a way of bridging communication between the entire staff for what they call that holistic strategy, which then I guess allows them to, as they say, they have 5 p.m. call meetings each day to discuss content and audience. So I know they're doing audience outreach, newsletters, surveys, and things like that. So there may be kind of a twofold participation, but what I think their initial usage of that term was the way that they felt that they needed to rework their quote unquote staff and editorial and managerial structure in order to take a step up from where they had plateaued in the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah. So holistic strategy, I guess, to boil this down, you really do need to have these 3 hats that you can just swap in and out. And these are just concrete goals that a lot of publishers are used to thinking about. When a publisher launches a news website, are they thinking about growing and engagement as distinct things? Because I'm not sure they are. And I think that may be part of the problem, because they are very different goals, and you have to go about them in different ways. I mean, we talk about this today in news tech. I mean, we've got distribution down, we've got our workflow process down. That's different than the engagement with the audience, which is also good. The growth, we want to see more growth. That's really a separate thing from the engagement. We get engagement on everything we put out there, and sometimes it's even from the original author of the article. So that's great. But is that really converting to numbers, I guess, is the question.
The other thing is they needed to take a look at each one of these tasks, see what the tools were, and also judge how much it cost to implement these things versus the return on investment that you may or may not be getting, or also judging how long a return on investment might take, depending on some of the longer term strategies. But each of these bullet points is actually a subsection in that task list. So they have a whole series of tasks related to each one of these bullet points and how they want to achieve them.
So they've got these different tiers. The types of things that are in the top tier are basic SEO on all articles, looking at the analytics on a weekly basis to then interpret and apply in terms of what type of content you're going to cover in the future. Yeah, I think this first page is a great place to start. Then they've got a lot of nice to haves in here, which would be definitely lower priority, but
they've even got things like quarterly webinars, which is something that we've done at our hometown. So there's a lot of things that I found that made them successful that drew parallels to some of the things that we've been finding that have been working nicely for just increasing our reach and engagement.
And I can see a whole follow-up on this, Chris. This is great for our hometown audience. But yeah, this was just a cool story because it's such a focused news organization, just education in North Carolina. It's super focused, but also a very large potential audience there. I mean, even outside of North Carolina, just to see what's going on, if you're just in education, to follow a site like this.
They're at 2021, they were at 2 million page views. And one of the strategies down in their list, of course, on their wish list is to get full 100 county coverage.
Let's just rapid fire go through these points here. In terms of the website, that's something that we handle for our customers completely. So just the management of the website and optimizing for search engines and everything. Email, including newsletters, that's built into the platform. Specifically with full service, it'll automatically go out after you send us the files, but we can also automate it for self-service. Social media, again, you could break this topic up in much more detail as they do on the spreadsheet, but we've got social media auto posts to just make sure you're getting everything out there in the cheapest, most efficient way possible.
This next one, Reach, is that's their in-house design tool. So I'm not sure exactly what it does, but I think it looks like maybe handles gravity forms and some things like that for
surveys,
polls. Yeah,
coming in text form. Yep, definitely something we want to look into. Then we've got fostering belonging. So donations and memberships. Okay, definitely we're well into the membership space, and donations are always a good option to offer on the site. There's really no reason to not have that there in case a current subscriber wants to give more. Events. I think this is something that newspapers could really do a lot more on. You know, I know that they've got a lot going on, but I just think that it would be a pretty natural thing for them to do because they know the events are going on in the first place, just to get a little bit more involved and partner up with these organizers. This is something that we are very focused on. We're doing monthly webinars now, and we're bringing in experts, professional speakers. So there's a whole business that we're trying to build behind this, where all of our customers would attend for free, but we also want to offer this to anyone in the industry at a minimum cost. So then we've got brand building, swag, and sponsorships. What would that look like for a local newspaper?
You could offer a local newspaper tote at the baseball game.
Sure, absolutely. Just get the name out there.
For a fairly low investment of a few $100s to give them away to the first 100 patrons.
Right.
Somebody's going to be using that at the grocery store. It's got a website, it's got your logo, and that's got some people thinking about you.
And I can kind of picture that.
Bumper stickers.
Yeah.
I support local journalism. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and that's what our most PBS stations do is with a donation, you get a little bit of swag to show that you did that.
Absolutely. So yeah, maybe swag for subscribers. I follow a lot of our customers on Facebook, and we see a lot more people going to basketball games, football games, and just filming them live, either streaming them through Facebook or YouTube. But the point is they're already at the game. Just to set up more of a presence there, I think would make sense. You know, if you could just carve out a little section for yourself, bring like a table from where you got your camera set up and have the swag right there and just be in the community.
Swag doesn't even have to cost anything or very little to a publisher, because a lot of times you get bigger companies, like maybe your local grocery store or something. They will give you stuff in exchange for maybe a free ad spot. And it's a write-off for them for their taxes as a donation. So swag is a good, I really like this, and it doesn't have to cost.
Yeah, you go to the advertiser and say, give me a sample of these to give away at the game. We'll be at the game. We'll give it away. We'll do this cross promotion with the newspaper. And again, like this stuff, you got to think about the time investment in these things. But if you're already going to the game and you're already covering these things because you need to, even if you're not filming it, just covering it for the paper, just putting in the extra effort to just leave more of an impression, I guess. Offering content to other outlets and platforms. And this reminds me of something, just talking about partnering with other bloggers in the area, giving them a platform to speak, but also then getting content from them and coming up with a freelance arrangement.
That plays into SEO too.
Absolutely, because they've got a presence elsewhere. And now they're appearing on your site and linking back to theirs and back and forth. And they've got a Twitter presence. I mean, I would look to Twitter. That's kind of where I think people that are just natural born journalists, even if that's not the career they pursue, that's the platform they love. And they'll be, very active on there. Okay, very cool. This was a pretty high level one, lots of information in it. So we'll try to break that down a little bit more for our hometown customers. In the area of big tech, we've got some news from Google, and we're going to talk about what are the implications for local publishers, especially those on our hometown ad network, which of course uses AdSense. So Tyler, would you walk us through this one and what are the take-home points?
So this is really high level, mostly investor focused stuff towards the end. But I think the big thing to look at is all of Google's ad revenue trended way upwards in the last quarter of last year.
Okay.
And a lot of it even beat projections. So that's my first big takeaway point.
Okay.
But then towards the end, it kind of tweaks the framing here and explains why that might be. The reason that it did so well was because Google gets its own data direct.
Right.
And wasn't as impacted as other sources were from those iOS changes that we've been talking about for what seems like forever.
Absolutely. Right. For anyone that's just tuning in for the first time or doesn't know what we're talking about, the iOS privacy changes, probably all seen it when you update your apps. It's going to ask you, are you willing to let us track you across the internet? And that's what's called a first party cookie. So they want to do that so then they can serve ads to you or change the app experience somehow. But it's becoming first party without these third parties in the middle. And traditionally, the third parties have been Meta, Facebook, Twitter, and Snapchat. But I mean, this is also part of the argument against Google in their antitrust situation because they control the whole environment. They're publishers and advertisers. They're controlling the advertising market, and then they're running those ads on YouTube and on Google search. But the point is they control the relationship with the audience. And as I keep saying, I think this is a good opportunity for publishers in general because they're more like Google than they are like Facebook and these other third parties in the sense that they are building a first party relationship with the subscribers. They're not collecting data in this background way without the readers knowing about it. Everyone opted in to have cookies put on their browser at one point, but it's so vague and the terms of service are so long, you don't even know that you're doing it. So the legislation is fighting against Meta and Facebook, and this is kind of the result. I mean, so it's interesting that Google is less impacted by this. I mean, they're already the leader in this space. I mean, they got to be the biggest of all these companies mentioned here, except for maybe Apple. So they're going to continue to get stronger, but I'm thinking that local news publishers could take advantage of this trend.
And towards the end, it even mentions that there is legislation in the works to try and limit Google's ability to promote their own content and sources. I think the big takeaway I would take from all of this is, A, here are the reasons why you're seeing all these stories about Google having such a good year. It's because this hasn't hit them yet. And B, this does show that the advertising money is there and might be more available for smaller outlets to capture in the future.
That's a really interesting big picture article and very financial and tons of numbers. But if we just look at what does this mean? What is the trend behind this? So that actually is a nice segue. I want to open it up again. Anyone else that has any comments on this article?
It's not about this article per se, but I've been doing some other reading, but it's basically how the iOS privacy and security features are skewing some of the data that we've been using. So if someone gets a promotional email, newsletter email via their phone, what Apple's new privacy thing is doing is it's actually preloading images and things in the background.
Yeah.
And I think Gmail is starting to implement this as well. But what that's doing is it's returning false opens to the email tracking.
Oh, wow.
And so one of the big things we're going to have to start looking at, and I've got some coverage on this about how the funnel works from getting them to open to they click on a story versus they're all the way down at the bottom of the newsletter and they click some interaction there. We're going to need to shift how we judge our analytics on newsletters because these privacy features are going to affect how that data is skewed.
Wow. Yeah, I was not aware of that. So it's almost like the rug is going to start getting pulled out from publishers. If they do start getting this inaccurate data, they may think it's real, but this pro-privacy movement is going to be slowly taking away any kind of effectiveness that they have with their newsletters, and they won't even know it. We should definitely learn more about that one. Is that a really prominent thing? Because if publishers are starting to see increasing open rates and they...
Actually, the article I was reading said once that went in, some of the open rates would go up like 40%.
Where?
And it's completely phantom. And so they recommend that you just not quite ignore, but don't use that as a primary metric. Use the deeper engagement with the newsletter to actually see what engagement is.
Well, you got your stats on your website, and that's first party data, and you should be able to see when that's coming from a newsletter. It might mean that you need to use tracking links, but usually we can tell when it's a direct entry from a newsletter. We might need to spend some time looking at Matimo soon. Okay, last article here. We'll hit it really quick. This hits close to home for our hometown. So this article is focused on the Minnesota paper, the Cook County News Herald. And Terry, Chris, you guys know they've been with us for years.
I used to process their paper every week.
There you go. Yes. So very close to home for you. I think it was about a year ago now, pretty close to it. They were purchased, like with many small newspapers. It was a mom and pop operation. And, they were ready to retire. And that's going to start happening more and more. And the buyers in some markets are just not there. Unfortunately, we've seen that many times, and then the newspaper closes. But CherryRoad Media is coming in and rescuing dozens of newspapers like that. I feel like it's almost every week that I see a press release on a whole new group of papers purchased. And I really believe that they are going in there to invest in the newspapers, not mine them for assets. And it's like the polar opposite of the vulture capitalists. Can't blame them for it. Vulture capitalism or venture capitalism exists to make money in times of crisis. And so that's just them doing what they do. But he's actually buying papers from the venture capitalists. So he's not only
both that and he can't buy one and they shut it down. He actually opens a replacement outlet.
He opened it. Yep. I saw that story. He tried to buy it from Alden. The CEO there, very interesting guy. I met him one time. We had a phone conversation when he first bought the paper. He was very interested in the unique tools that we're bringing to the Cook County News Herald. Interesting thing is he comes from a technology background, but I think he's just trying to stay focused on the education segment. That's really where I think is probably huge demand for that right now. So he's very busy with that. So we're happy to host the website and bring the unique tools that we have on WordPress to this paper. But I'm thinking if we could maybe at some point sit down with Mr. Larson, the new publisher there. That's the thing about Jeremy, the CEO of CherryRoad Media. He's the owner, but he's not going in there and micromanaging every little thing and telling them what to write about and what not to cover.
I was just going to say that, Matt, because one of the first things that impressed me about Jeremy was that they retained the staff at the Cook County News Herald. They had no intention of sweeping out the office and bringing in their own people. They're very involved. Don't get me wrong. But to me, they seem very focused on preserving local news from local people by local people. It's been a great relationship so far.
They understand what makes local journalism work. It has to be people living in the community that in many cases have lived there their whole lives. They really care about the changes and they know what to focus on. What he does is comes in and invests in the technology. I read this whole section. They upgraded their equipment, computers, got that all up and running. And he's also really focused on trying to help newspapers get into the digital advertising services, thinking much further beyond just a display ad on the website, but how they could act as a digital agency in these small communities that, unless you have someone that's a social media marketing whiz, it's tough to find those kinds of resources to help you really advertise your business. So it's hard enough running a small business in a community like these. You don't really want to be spending the time on marketing. If you could just outsource that to the newspaper, you're already buying a print ad from them. Let's get you set up with a website. Let's get your social media pages up to speed. Make sure they have all the same contact information on it. This is something that we've learned about and that we're sharing with our publishers, the importance of having the same description, same physical address across Facebook, Twitter, Google My Business, all these different platforms. They have an area where you can put your contact information and like a description of the business. To get the best SEO, all those are going to be matching. Now, that's just a basic thing that a lot of businesses don't even know, let alone do they have time to go in there and keep that up to date. Yeah, I think he's just really bringing fresh blood into this industry, and he's really got the right intentions and the right mission here. So proud to be associated and working with Jeremy at CherryRoad. Definitely hope to continue to grow our relationship with him. Let's end it here. And thank you, everyone, very much. Appreciate your help, and we'll talk to you later. Today in News Tech, the podcast covering innovation in digital journalism. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and subscribe on YouTube or any of your favorite podcast apps. We'll see you tomorrow.
At our hometown, we help newspapers build WordPress websites, design native apps, and develop digital subscription models. If you are interested in a free prototype of your publication on WordPress, go to ourhometown.com and click the Contact Us button.